Welcome to the Past Life Project. I'm Monique, hypnotherapist and regression specialist. Let me bring you into my world where just another day in the office is not your typical desk job. In each episode, we will be delving into the extraordinary realm of past lives through my own therapy practice, client stories and interviews, and conversations with practitioners that are utilizing past lives as a powerful modality for healing. Tune in to find out how people just like you are healing from a range of physical, emotional, and spiritual issues by exploring their previous incarnations. Are you ready to dive into the future of therapy? It's time to turn back time with the Past Life Project. Welcome to the Past Life Project podcast. I'm your host, Monique, hypnotherapist and regression therapy specialist. Lorraine Flaherty is a transformational therapist, author, artist, and past life specialist with nearly 30 years' experience helping people uncover the deeper patterns shaping their lives so they can heal and grow. She blends therapeutic expertise with spiritual wisdom, drawing on hypnosis and regression to uncover echoes from childhood, ancestral influences, and other lifetimes to release the patterns that keep them from living fully. She's the author of Healing with Past Life Therapy, published by Inner Traditions. Her work invites people to explore who they really are so healing, inner freedom, and fullest potential can unfold. Welcome, Lorraine. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you very much for the invite. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, it was great. We were talking a little bit off recording about how it's always amazing to have this opportunity to talk about the things that you're passionate about. And I think that really comes through in these opportunities that you really get to talk about your passion, and that excitement in the voice and the way you present it is apparent. So I'm excited to hear about your work and how you got on this journey.
Yeah, and thank you. And I salute you for taking these steps and having these conversations so that we can share with the world how amazing this work is, because I think it's often put aside as something that is, well, you'll know yourself that sometimes people think it's a bit woo-woo or it's a bit out there, and that it isn't, it doesn't have any real validity in the kind of, the real healing work. I mean, you probably know from my book that I've taught in medical schools for many, many years with clinical hypnosis and in all the major UK universities. And I wasn't even allowed to mention regression or past lives. It wasn't a topic that I was able to broach at all, because it wasn't considered to be not just of any use, but literally the words were that it was too woo-woo. It was too out there. And what I actually loved, I never mentioned it. I kept my teaching very, very straight, very, very clinical. But so many of the students, when they'd finished the course, would actually approach me afterwards. And many of them came to see me and they said, we're really conscious that there is this whole other aspect to your work, and we respect the fact that you didn't talk about it, but can we talk about it? And, can we book in for a session? And that was always, that always felt like a real win for people in that space to get it.
That's interesting. I've had a similar experience too, doing my clinical hypnosis certification through a university. And it was the same thing, that our instructor, she could not touch on past life regression at all. So if students wanted to, they could explore it, but with her separately. But under the university banner, it was like this taboo thing that you couldn't even broach. It's very curious, isn't it?
Very curious, yeah. And when I did my training, one of my favourite lecturers, who I chose as my supervisor because he was so knowledgeable and he was so passionate, and he was just a brilliant teacher. And the past life regression module, we did actually have one. It was towards the end of the class, to the end of the 3-year training. And I was so excited for it. I was really looking forward to it, because it was probably the thing that I was waiting for the most, because it fitted in with all of my spiritual journeys and meditations and all the things that I'd been doing. And spontaneous recall of past lives. So I couldn't wait till I could get in and learn how to do this. And on the morning when we opened the class, his first line was, I'm just going to put it out there that I don't actually believe in past lives.
Even though he was teaching it?
He said, I'm going to teach you the protocol. I'm going to teach you the process. But as far as I'm concerned, these are just metaphors that the mind is creating, and I don't believe in past lives. And I was so devastated because I'd waited all this time, and here's my most respected, my most valued lecturer. And so he then went on to do a demonstration, and we'd had loads of demos throughout the training. As you know, when you train, the teachers will always do that. And yes, the demos were interesting, and insights came up that were, really, really useful for people. But we never really saw any dramatic change or any real healing from the person in the class. Life just went on. They learned some stuff. Even I was a demo, and it was useful, but it didn't really change anything. And it was a guy in our class who was really quite shy. Lovely guy, but very shy. He would always tend to sit at the back. He didn't really contribute very much. He was just a bit timid and quiet. And his hand shot up to be the demo subject, which I thought was really interesting anyway. So he goes up and is subsequently put into hypnosis. And part of his problem was that he wanted to work through was that he struggled to really commit and struggled to follow through on things. That he would, there would be things that he'd wanted to do in his life, but he would often sort of fall at the last hurdle. And I think he was a bit concerned he might do that with the hypnosis. He wanted to break the pattern. So next thing, he is describing this really vivid scene of being in a walnut wood lined cabin on a ship that was travelling from, I'm not entirely sure where it was travelling from, but I think it was England, but it was travelling to Africa. And it was, I think, late 1800s. And he got really embarrassed at one point because he had a realisation that in the past life he was a woman, he was female. And he was visibly uncomfortable describing when the teacher was asking questions to describe him and what he was wearing and, to get the sort of the grounding into the character. And cutting a long story short, it transpired that he had been a young woman that came from a very wealthy family, and the main aim of the family was, minimal education, but find a husband and have a family and get married and do all of that. But this young woman was really ambitious and motivated, and she wanted to be a doctor. And she had read everything that she could get her hands on and was really passionate about it, but she knew that there was no chance that she would ever get to do anything like that. So she found a group of people that were going out to Africa to work as nurses to help with hospitals and schools out there, and she ran away. So this journey on the ship was her heading off into a new life to be a nurse, to make a difference and to work with the doctors and, study medicine and do what she could. She really wanted to contribute to the world. So it was a really valid and worthy cause. But shortly into the regression, there was a gasp and, sudden upset. And it turned out that the ship had struck something and was sinking. And the cabin started to fill with water and he couldn't get out, or she couldn't get out, and died, drowned on the boat. That was the final moments. And I always remember the teacher saying, well, what's the last thought that's going through your mind as you're leaving that lifetime? And as the nurse or the female character, he said, I feel like a failure. I feel like I've let everybody down. I feel like I've let my family down. I haven't actually helped anybody. So the death point was really feeling like a waste of space and a failure. And you could tell that the energy from that had made this person think, well, I'm not going to take a chance again. I'm not going to do it. Why would I put myself out there? Because I'm a failure. And so this beautiful piece of work happened where the insights came through about the fact that it didn't necessarily mean the achievement of anything. It was the intention. And the intent had been to sacrifice everything, all the comforts, to go and do this. That it was the most brave and wonderful thing to commit life to helping others. And there was this sudden, you could see this guy's face suddenly changed. And it was like we were watching a weight, the weight of this energy of I'm a failure coming off him. It was really surreal. And he was crying, the whole class is crying, and it was really emotional. And within the healing part and the transformational part, the message was she didn't get to do it. She didn't get to help people because the life got cut short, but you can. You've come back to fulfill that, and you're now learning something that is really going to help you to help people. And I swear to God, we watched this guy's posture change. He sat up, everything changed. It was like something had switched. And when he came out of that session, it was like he'd been reborn. He was confident. He was committed. Suddenly, in the classes subsequent to the session, he was speaking out. He was engaged. He started joining in with, discussions about things and getting really animated. And I pulled my teacher, my supervisor, to the side, and I remember saying to him, you need to stop what you're doing. You really need to stop this saying, I don't believe in it. I said, because we've all just witnessed a miracle happen. That was a miracle, and that was better than anything that we've ever seen. And I said, and he was quite spiritual. This guy was, I think he was a Sufi. So, he said, well, it doesn't really align with our teachings. I said, go back and read them again, because I've studied every religion that you can think of, and the esoteric and mystical sides of them do all believe in reincarnation. The stories change as things get built around it. I said, but there isn't a tradition that doesn't have that belief. I said, we're all eternal. We all come from the same source. So, of course, it's in there. And I challenged him. I said, you need to go away and research it. Anyway, bless him. The following year, he ended up doing a masterclass in whether there was a correlation between regression and reincarnation and hypnosis. And he went in and he really researched it, and he completely changed his mind. He became converted, and it was great. So that was my first real kind of challenge, I guess, with the inner world of it and the teaching space, where we were able to get people to see things for what they were.
Yeah. Wow. And I just think, well, little did he know by volunteering that he would be also his experience, this catalyst for your instructor as well, too, to go into it deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, because by nature of who he was, he'd never volunteered for anything before. And I think it was his higher self that threw his arm in the air. I don't think he would have willingly put himself in that position, because he was somebody that, just don't look at me. He really didn't want to be sort of seen by anybody. So I think that he was getting assistance from a higher power.
Oh, yeah, because to go from that to sitting in front of all of your peers in your most vulnerable state is a big jump of courage. That's amazing. Wow. So that was your introductory into this world, then, was witnessing that. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it was something that I was very aware of before that, but the actual practicing of it, officially, I'd been studying. I went to the College of Psychic Studies in central London as soon as I was old enough, and I was doing all kinds of psychic development. And quite often, what would happen is that we would do these meditation classes. And interestingly, there was one process that they used to do, one of the teachers used to do, and she used to call it the Tibetan Wheel of Life, where we would drop into a meditation, and the intent was to connect with this ancient Tibetan. And every single time we did it, I dropped into a past life memory. So it wasn't it wasn't specific that that's what we'd do. The intention was to just go into the space and see what came up. And nobody else in the class seemed to be having past life recall, they were getting messages or they were getting insights. But every time I did it, I fell into yet another interesting past life. So yeah, it was just the sort of the route of how to do it deliberately, if you like, how to do it intentionally, I guess would be the phrase.
It's amazing that those breadcrumbs were already laid out for you. Like, follow this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and I mean, I'd say you've probably, I'm sure, had similar situations where when I travel, which, and I've always loved traveling anyway. And usually the more obscure the place is, the more I like it. But the amount of times I would arrive in a new country or a new city or a new town and have that overwhelming sense of, oh my God, I've come home, and know what's going to be around the corner when I couldn't possibly, because I'd never been there before, not in this life. So there were loads of moments like that. So, my belief in other lifetimes was pretty strong before we did that. So yeah, that's why I've been looking forward to that class so much.
But I think that's such a beautiful thing to bring into it, because I find there are many classes that treat past life regression in a very clinical way. And it's like, boom, boom, boom. This is the process. This is how you get them into it. This is how you release, and then you're done. And they forget about the whole energetic component to it, and also your role as the therapist in that energetic container, and basic energetic hygiene and how not to take on all of your clients' stuff. And there's a very important part that I find is missing when we're treating it as this very clinical procedure. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think so many of the students that were on my class, and I remember the director of the college coming in at the beginning and saying 13% of you are actually going to finish this course and go on to be practitioners at the beginning, when there were kind of 60 of us in the class. And I remember thinking, well, I don't know who the others are going to be, but I know one of those is me, because I was very, very committed. So, and interestingly, it was all the people that I connected with and became friends with were all the ones that went on to do it. So I think there's a gravitational pull, isn't there, when you are all on that same page. But what I was really surprised by, and I questioned it when we started the training, was the requirement for us to do therapy on ourselves. Because I know as a psychotherapist, when you're doing psychotherapy training for the 5 years, I mean, it's mandatory. It's got to, every week you're doing sessions. And before I even started my training, I had done 5 years of psychosynthesis once a week. So, and again, I hadn't really, when I started that, I mean, I was working as a hairdresser. I was a hair and makeup artist, working, sort of running a chain of hairdressing salons. So I hadn't even had the plan yet to go into doing hypnosis. I mean, I felt a pull and I felt a calling to do something else, but I think I thought it was something for me much later in life. But I knew also that I needed to work on myself. So, yeah, like you say, it's the stepping stones, or the steps that get there. I'd already done 5 years of working on my own inner world and clearing my own stuff. But when I asked at the training course, they said, oh, no, we just leave it up to the students to do their own therapeutic work. And of course, you get to practice on each other once a month in the classroom. So you will effectively be having sessions. And I did think that it was slightly, what's the word I'm looking for? A bit negligent to not insist that everybody did that work. And I know for sure that out of the ones that went ahead to do it, they were all the ones that were committed and were doing regular work. Because as you said, when you're working as a therapist, you are taking on a lot of people's stuff. So you have to clear the decks. And as a therapist, I'm sure you've found it as well, where you end up with clients that come in, and then the first one will be talking about a particular problem, and you think, oh, sort of, resonates a little bit with, something going on with me, but you park it because the session's all about your client, but you make a note to go, oh, that's interesting. And then when 5 clients back to back all come in and they've all got exactly the same problems, and you're, all right, I'm listening. Okay.
It's a bit uncanny.
It is. Yeah. And you can't make it up. You can't make it up. And, I know for a fact that it's an immediate telephone call to my supervisor or to one of my colleagues to go, okay, this has been flagged. Clearly I need to do some work on this now to clear it. And, and I love how that works.
Oh, me too. Or after you shift something in yourself, all of a sudden, stream of clients come in that are coming in with the same thing that you just shifted. I feel you can only take people so far as you've gone yourself. Yeah. And if you're not willing to do that, you can't take those people further than you've gone. And it also gives you a sense of empathy that when you're asking them to go through these experiences, that you know what they're asking them to do and how much courage it takes to just, like this example you were saying, to go in front of, not that client sessions are in front of the classroom, but to go in front of another human being like that and to be asked to open up emotionally and be vulnerable like that. If you haven't done that yourself, it's easy just to ask something of someone and not really know the extent of what that means to do that.
Indeed. And also what I've found is that there are lots of modalities, or there are lots of people working who have a very good academic understanding of what the process is. But there is nothing more powerful than when someone sits in the chair in front of you and they're presenting with a problem that is something that you've overcome, and you can look them in the eye and say, mm-hmm. And it's without even having to go there, because again, it's not, the session isn't about, the therapist, but there's a big difference when somebody knows that you know. And that evidence that comes from, yep, it's, you've been there and you've walked through through the doorway, through to the other side of it, and to just be able to acknowledge that. And, occasionally I'll say to people, well, that's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do, because I've been where you are and I know what it looks like on the other side. So, not going into detail about what's happened, but I find that makes people breathe out as well. Because it's that evidence and proof. Because there's always going to be a question in the back of somebody's mind when they do this work. And you'll know yourself as a therapist, we don't give any guarantees. We have no idea how much of, how much clearing or release or what changes are going to happen as a result of the journey. You can only be the guide and take people through to the information that they need and help them to move through it. But there's no way of knowing the impact that session's going to have. Although, of course, I think the more experience you have, the more you know that it is going to change. It is going to make a difference, whether they see it immediately or later, but it will. And that evidence only comes from that deep, deep knowing. And when you say, yep.
It's that human connection too, isn't it? Bringing
it is.
I don't know, humanity back into therapy instead of it being such a cold clinical thing that you're the therapist and you're meant to be this robot or computer. And there's, like you said, there's something when you're sitting in a room with another human being and they're expecting you to open up, that it's reciprocal. And as you had said, it's their session, but they want to be there with the human that actually has emotions and empathy, and it's not just a computer that they're typing things into and that's just spitting answers back to them. You want that humanity of, okay, this person has been through this and they have gone through the other side, and it gives them that hope too, and that they're not alone. I find that's the biggest thing too, is we walk around with our masks on all day, and when we open up in these ways, it's like, oh, I'm not alone. I just met one other person today that told me that they've been on a similar journey. And that in itself is a huge just perception shift to start to move things along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I find with my sessions, which tend to be quite long, because I really do like to give people space to share their story, and as they share the story, to unravel some of the patterns that they might not have seen before. Because as I say, most people, when they tell you stories about their life, they tend to do it in bite-sized pieces. It doesn't tend to be linear. So when you get people to look at, well, what was happening with your parents, and then what was happening when you were at school, and then what was happening with friendships, and what was happening when you started working, and relationships, and those patterns start to emerge. And quite often, when, and again, as I said, you'll know this, when you're on the other side, sometimes it's much easier to join the dots for the person, and sometimes you'll say, oh, that's interesting, that relates back to that. And those things that happen to you at that point in your life, and you see the light bulb moment for the client when they go, oh my goodness, I never thought of that before. I'd never linked those things together. And then suddenly things start to make sense. And I think that's the beauty of it, because when things make sense and they understand where it came from, it's so much easier then when you go in and do the inner work, that their logical mind is also on board. Logical mind isn't there floating around going, well, what is this for? And what does that mean? And how's this supposed to help? Logical mind has already gone, oh my goodness, I can see the bits where all the dots have joined up. So yes, let's go and look for other dots. And then when you unpick it from the sort of, the starting point, I guess, the root, one of the earliest or most significant moments when this thing began. And that's the beauty of the other life work or past life work. Because, and obviously I do a lot of inner child and ancestral work, but when you're going back and unraveling the current life story, which is something that they're deeply immersed in, and sometimes it's harder, I think, to recall some of that stuff, because it's not that it's fresh because childhood was a long time ago, but it's more raw because it's active in their memory banks currently. And the beauty about doing past life work is that there is a dissociative step. They will always be, they're kind of the observer. They've stepped into that space, but it's them, but it isn't them. And I think doing that work from that separate space of this other life makes it much, much easier to actually go in and fully experience it all, to really go there.
And connect those dots, like you said, and see, like, okay, where are those patterns, where are those belief systems, those behaviors that have followed me? And when you see it kind of smacked upside your head so many times, it's like, oh, but then, as you had mentioned, this beautiful role of the therapist being the mirror, because aren't we all like this? When it's your stuff, it's all in your face. And to have someone that's a couple steps away from you that can see with clarity, and help you connect the dots, it's an amazing thing. I think we, I don't know, often just try to power through and do all these things by ourselves. And I think there's place for self-work, but there's also place for working with another person that just has a couple steps back and can, like you said, look and see a different perspective of things. And when it's brought to your attention, it's like that light bulb goes off, or when you see that pattern and so many past lives, like, oh, that's what I'm doing now.
And I think the other beauty of it is, because I was working, it was a woman a few years ago, and she had a terrible history with men and relationships. And two in particular, an ex-boyfriend and an ex-husband who had really given her a dog's life. And she was, I guess, righteously so nervous about ending or entering into another relationship, because this had happened so many times. There'd been minor versions of it, but the last two had been really quite brutal. And she was a young, beautiful, vibrant woman. She didn't want to be on her own for the rest of her life. So this was her intention. Was there any way to find out? And I think what really blew her away was that when she went into the other lifetime, the past life, these two men had showed up as, one had shown up as a father figure and one had shown up as an ex-husband. And they had been very controlling in that lifetime. as they had been this time round. And she had been quite wild and putting her life in their mind at risk, because it was early 1900s where women were just put into sanatoriums if you were too out there or too vibrant or promiscuous, or you just didn't behave in the way that they perceived that you should. They would just lock people up, and that's what they'd done. They'd actually put her into this asylum. But of course, when she looked at it from the further perspective, because she was angry and bitter and ended up going a bit crazy in the sanatorium, because there wasn't anything wrong with her, but being locked up in there, just ended up making her go stir crazy. But once she got to the end of it and saw things from their perspective, actually the two men had been heartbroken and they'd been united in their grief in the life, but they were terrified for her well-being, and they had been convinced by the medical world and by the priests and by all of the people in the community that that was the best option for her, that she'd be a danger to herself and that she would ruin the reputation of, well, her reputation and then her family. So where she felt as though she had been punished and that they didn't love her and that they had been angry, and she died being furious with them and angry with them and almost out for revenge, wanting to get them back. And then, of course, it was a real shock to find out that these two men were part of her soul group and that they had volunteered in the spirit realms before she came into the incarnation to help her to be there through the various different trials and soul contracts and lessons that she'd chosen. And because in that lifetime she hadn't registered that they had been there because they cared about her and that she was on this kind of wild trajectory, they hadn't kind of gone to the end and high-fived and said, great, our job was to protect you and keep you safe. And we did it. It hurt. We sacrificed our our lives because we felt bad, but we protected you. So they felt like they'd completed the lesson. She didn't, because she didn't get it, that they were there to protect her. And she'd just been angry with them. And that anger and the lack of forgiveness had just meant that they'd had to do it again in this lifetime. And of course, as they came into her life this time, her internal anger at them came out. So she suddenly realised that a lot of the difficulties she'd had with them, she had been part of the generator of it. She had behaved in ways that made it impossible for them to be gentle and kind with her. And they were still trying to protect her. But in this life, it came across as controlling and, trying to put her down. So it was really huge because I got her to meet with these souls in the spirit realms, and they had the conversation and they said, look, we signed up to protect you. And the contract was, we will protect you no matter what. That's the bottom line. Whatever it takes, we're here to protect you. And of course, then the question was asked, well, did you protect her in the past life? And they said, well, yeah, to the best of our knowledge, we did the best that we could. We thought we had. And she suddenly stopped and said, oh my goodness, I just need to say thank you. I need to thank you for doing that. I need to honour it. I need to forgive you for feeling like your intention was bad. And it suddenly, it kind of popped the whole thing. And there was this beautiful reunion and a real healing and a release. And we cleared the old contract and we freed these men from this obligation of the protection role. And, they were all given permission to be more autonomous, but to support each other in healthy ways. But they didn't have to be tied into any tests. And when she came out of the session, when she came out of the hypnosis, I mean, she really cried. She really, there was a huge release, because her whole thing was, why did these men do this to me? Why, she felt like they'd hated her and they'd, been so brutal. And suddenly she got it. That actually they weren't trying to do her harm. It was because, and certainly in the soul realms, they said, well, we volunteered because we love you so much in the spirit realms. We wanted to make sure that we were the ones that played that role because we wanted to do it properly. We wanted you to get that lesson as soon as possible so that you could let it go and you could move on to doing other things. So when she came back, she had such a sense of gratitude and love for these two men. And it didn't mean that she was going to enter back into connection with them in this life. You know, the role had been played. You know, the divorce had happened. She'd moved on, but it was such a weight off her shoulders to have that peace that came from that, and the knowing that it was very specific to things that they'd agreed upon. So she didn't need to worry that that was going to be a part of her future relationships. That she could actually start afresh and clear the slate and have a different expectation of what love was going to be.
Amazing. And really when you're talking about the emotions coming up and that truth in your body as the barometer, that it reacts in ways to these things that if they were truly metaphors, that your body wouldn't respond in such a visceral sort of manner. It's amazing. And not taking that baggage, because isn't there always that fear of these patterns, you've seen them happen so many times, and then you come into this lifetime and it's like, it's like you have spiritual PTSD, that it's just going to keep continuing going on, so that she could be free from that and see it for what it is and enter new relationships with that lightness. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I love about it so much as well is that quite often when people come in, and obviously people come in because they're presenting with a problem or a challenge or a block that they have. So, you know, they're talking about things where they've either felt helpless or worthless, or, you know, not a victim per se, but, you know, they've gone into kind of a powerless mode. And suddenly when you take them to that space where they realise, oh, hang on a minute, I chose this. I asked for this. You know, these are souls who volunteered intentionally to help me. So all of the situations that are going on in my life, all the relationships that I've had and I am to have, are potentially ones that were prearranged. There isn't, you know, I mean, what do we call fate? But, you know, and synchronicity of things appearing in our world. But this idea that, you know, you chose your family because they would provide you with exactly what you needed for your soul's growth. So that really nothing that, especially the significant stuff that's happened accidentally. So you're never really a victim to circumstances. And that's so empowering to say, oh, hang on a minute. Okay, why is this happening? What did I choose? Why am I experiencing this right now? And what is it that I'm supposed to learn from it? And it's a completely different energy. It's a completely different conversation that people are having with themselves. And it really puts people back into their strength, I think, because they recognise, well, you know, the harder it is, the more brave or crazy I must have been as a soul to. Sometimes even I think, oh my God, why did I choose that? Really? And then my guide said, well, we tried to persuade you to do things a different way, but you said that's too easy and I want to do it properly. Why didn't you talk me out of it? They said, we tried.
Those very ambitious souls. I like to call them, speaking from personal experience, of like, wow, that was a lot. But isn't that empowering when you know that you chose it? Then you also know that you can choose now,
yes,
that you're not bound to any of it either, and you can choose differently and create your future. It's a really amazing shift to be that I'm the mercy of everyone else and I'm that victim to I choose what to get out of this experience. And honestly, humans, what better way to get your attention? Because like you said, everyone walks in with an issue. I think there's very few people that come in that are, oh, I'm just interested in past lives and kind of, right? I don't really have an issue to solve. Usually it's, I have this issue and it's glaring in my face and it's disrupting my daily life. And once it gets to that point, then I need to do something about it, or else we just stay in our comfort zones. But it's that being in that discomfort that motivates you to actually do something different about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Upon occasion, I have had people come in and say, oh, I'm just curious. In fact, one of my favourite ones was a guy that showed up, and he said, to be honest, he said, my mother bought me this for my birthday. He said, I don't really, we've had conversations about it. I'm interested in past lives, but, I haven't come here for any particular reason. And I said, yeah, that's what you think. And he stopped and he kind of looked, and I said, look, here's the thing. You might not think that you've come here for a particular reason, but it would be remiss of me to not use this process. His mum had paid for the session. I said, it would be really, poor form to not actually dig in and say, is there something? So is there an area of your life where things might not be working quite so well, that, things that could be improved upon? Is there an area you feel blocked or stuff? He said, no, not really. He said, I've got a great family, I've got a great wife, I love my kids, I love my job. I said, okay. I said, let's just elaborate on that a little bit, shall we? What do you do? He said, he was, what do they call it? Beyond an ambulance person, it's an accident, first responders. So he was a medic that would be called out. He would support the fire brigade. And so it was more than ambulance, but I can't remember the name of it. But, it was quite a significant job. And then he stopped and he looked at me and he went, oh, right. I said, what is it? And he said, I've just thought. He said, it's not really a problem for me so much. He said, but my family do complain quite a lot because paramedic, that was the word I was looking for. He's a paramedic. He said, my family complain all the time because I am a workaholic. And he said, I have kind of sacrificed time for them because once I'm on the road and once I'm immersed in things, he said, I just get lost in it and I do let them down. He said, I don't spend as much time with them. It is a bit obsessive. He said, I do kind of feel like I have to give and give and give in that. I said, okay, let's just explore that, shall we? And it was fascinating because he went back to a lifetime in, it was either 800 AD or 800 BC, somewhere around there. It was a long, long, long time ago. And he was describing his role as somebody who was a medic back then, but, in togas and, scrolls and all this. And this guy was completely obsessed with learning about the human body and learning about, how the system worked and infections and, how to fix things and bones. And, when people died, he'd have the cadavers brought to him and he would be there cutting them open and explore, investigating everything. And he was writing reams and reams and reams and reams of papers on all of the things that he was learning. And at a certain point, he said, I'm ridiculed because I have this, and I don't know where it came from, but I just have this really deep sense that it's important that I keep my area clean and that that I'm washing my hands. And he worked as a medic in a building nearby and was birthing babies and, healing people that were coming in that were sick or needed amputations. And they would all laugh at him because he would wash his hands and he would keep his space sterile. And they all poo-pooed it. Right? They thought it was a complete waste of time. And then I said, well, what's the most significant thing for you here in this space? And he said, well, I've kind of discovered this thing. And he said, I've had, patients coming in and they have pressure on the brain. And he said, and, by studying the anatomy, he said, I discovered that there was a little point at, somewhere at the back of the brain that if I just punctured that just a little bit, we could drain out the excess fluid and it resolved the swelling. And then these people were healing. Okay, it's quite specific. So anyway, in that lifetime, he never got married. He didn't spend time with his family. I mean, all he did was this. It was just his work. And when he died, having saved the lives of many, that was the other thing. So plague swept through the area at one point, and most of the people that he knew succumbed to the plague. He didn't, because his place was completely sterile and clean. And so the rats didn't come in. He was, he was completely obsessed with no vermin, no rats, no nothing. So he survived all of that. So at that point, people started to pay attention. Quite a few people were thinking, oh, maybe there's something in this cleanliness, sterile thing. But when he died really frustrated as this man in the in 800, whatever it was, because he felt like he hadn't learnt enough, he hadn't helped enough, he hadn't done enough. He needed to do more. And I said to him, because I'm thinking, well, this is clearly somebody that did a lot of work. And I won't always, but sometimes it's relevant to get historical data. And I said, well, what was your name back then? And he said, Paul. That's not a very 800, AD or BC name, is it? Paul. And I said, well, it may have pronounced different, or it may have had a different spelling, but Paul, Saul, they were biblical names. And I said, but what was your family name? What was your surname? Because I wanted to get a bit more details, see if we could research this person. And he said, it's something like Agamemnon or Agrippa or something like that. It isn't that, but it's something like that. It's Aga something. I said, okay. Anyway, as we started to do the healing part, and I'm bringing him to the space where he's meeting with all of the souls that had been with him in that lifetime, and we're finding out what the soul contract was. His soul contract was to see whether he would be prepared to sacrifice himself and his life for the well-being of others, which he had done completely in that lifetime. I mean, up to his dying breath, he was still trying to help and save people. So we were able to tick that box and say, yes, he achieved it, because he felt like he failed. He felt like a complete failure. And actually, we were able to show this Paul the advancements in medical science. And of course, and I don't know how you pronounce it, is it trepanning or trepanning, which is literally where they create a little hole in the back of there's an instrument, there's a gadget, which I knew about it. I didn't want to say anything when he was describing it, but I've been in and out of medical schools, and it's either trepanning or trepanning, where it's almost like a corkscrew. So there's a handle with a long spike, and they screw it into the somewhere in the brain, and it releases pressure. So when there's water on the brain or pressure on the brain, so that's actually officially a thing. So we showed this guy, you planted the seed. That is now a medical procedure that we're still using to the current day. Then it was all of his thing about the cleanliness and the washing of hands. That is now a thing. We literally got him to see that as a paramedic, that was priority. Keeping things sterile. So as that soul, he started to go, oh, like I was right. And so it's still, so I planted seeds and people are still doing it. It's like, yeah, you did the job. You couldn't do everything in that lifetime, but you planted the seeds and now it's still happening. So you could see the weight was coming off. This soul was going, oh, thank goodness. Oh, thank goodness. But when he ticked the box to say, yes, I've done it, I've achieved it, suddenly the penny dropped for him, in that he was still running that program in this lifetime. He was neglecting his family, his kids, his friends, his own social life. He was still in the rut of, I've got to do more, I've got to do more. So his higher self gave him permission to have a balance, that you can make a difference, but you can also have your life, and you can also have time for your family, and you can also have time for you, and you can have time for your life. You don't need to do it all. You don't need to sacrifice yourself anymore. That's done. And again, and this is the moment when you know that you've hit, as I said, I'm sure you know this, you've hit the right note, because that's when the tears come, and there's this huge release. Anyway, and there were a few other things, but then when I brought him out of the hypnosis, he kind of looked at me and he said, oh, yeah, you were right. I did come in for a reason, didn't I? Yeah, you did. Anyway, then we both got our phones out and we both did a little quick Google just to see, is there, somebody in 800s that Paul of Aegeus. Paul of Aegeus was a real person, and he left behind a mountain, an entire library full of documentation, of writings, of scrolls, of all his research. He was the one that discovered trepanning or trepanning or whatever it was, and had introduced this idea of. So, again, these are those moments when people say, oh, your mind is just making up a metaphor and it's, it isn't real. And, if that is the case, if it works, I don't care, really. I don't mind either way. But when you get evidence like that, he'd never heard of this guy. It wasn't somebody that he would have been taught about on his medical school training, because it's quite a specific avenue. But for him, it was such confirmation that everything that we'd done was the truth. And it was huge for him. He was absolutely blown away. And what was really funny, about 2 months later, his daughter turned up, and she was a nurse. And she came in and she said, "Thank you so much for what you did with my father. We actually see him now. We actually have family dinners. He actually shows up. He's like a different man. But now can I work on this?" She said, "I'd like to sort this out. Thank you very much." Because now her belief, now her faith in the process, there was no question. She absolutely recognised that it was, a valid therapeutic process. And I mean, to be honest, I can't actually remember what her one now actually was, but I know that she got the answers that she needed at the end.
Sometimes it's almost better to come in open-minded like that without a set agenda, because then you're just open to whatever needs to come will come, and you're not trying to consciously dictate how I need to experience things. It just it lands, and you're open to experience whatever comes.
And that's why I always say to people, just be curious about where you end up. Allow your conscious mind or your logical mind to just stay in that state of curiosity. And if you give that part of the mind permission at the end to pull it apart and research it and go into it, fine. And if there are things in there that don't resonate or don't make sense, you can discard that. But let's take the information that is helpful. But I think also after, I'm 26, 27 years in now to doing it officially, and I've never had information come up from a past life session, I'm sure you're the same, that wasn't credible, that wasn't valid. And I've never had, when people say, "Oh, everyone was Cleopatra," or "they were all Napoleon," or "they were all," I've never had that. I've not had people come in thinking that they were celebrities. And I did have one woman years and years ago, as a very old school, somebody that had been a part of Hollywood, but not in a huge way, but somebody that would have been known. She was mortified. This wasn't a, "Oh, yay, I want to be this person." She was embarrassed. She was mortified. She didn't want to say it. And in fact, I said to her, "Look, it doesn't matter. Let go of who the person is. Let's just get the lesson and the learning from it. Let's just get the healing that you need from it." I said, "Let's just park the idea of who this person was." So she said, "Okay." I said, "But look, why don't we?" I said, "Because I know you're really struggling with it." I said, "Why don't you come back in a law? Don't do any research. Don't." And she wasn't a fan of this person either. She didn't really know anything about her. It was a very minor person that had been, in the starting points of Hollywood. So it wasn't somebody that was particularly, we'd read books or see documentaries or anything. I said, "But what we will do," I said, "is that we'll go back and we'll dig a bit more into, what memories you can access of the early years, childhood stuff, and we'll get as much information, as much data as we can, so dates and names, and we'll do it as a real fact-finding thing. We've already healed the lifetime, so we're not having to go in from that angle." I said, "And then you and I can both go off separately and do some research and see if it correlates. And if it doesn't match, you can let the idea go, and maybe you just tapped into that life because it mirrored or it reflected stuff that you needed to learn. And if it does come through and the information's correct, then maybe you'll just have to accept that your soul did incarnate as that person, and that's fine." And of course we did that, and all the information that came up which was a lot, deep down into grandparents' names and where they were born, and date of birth for lots of people, and the school she went to, and early friends. And we both went off and did the research, and it was all accurate.
Amazing, right? And that's I found that exact same common thread because it's not a common thing that people come in with these more historically notable lives. But when they do, I've had the same experience. Every single one does not want to own that story. There's almost like this embarrassment of, oh, I'm going to be judged because I'm going to be one of those people that is, speaking from the rooftops about how I had this famous past life that none of them want it. And also, it was miserable. The ones that have had these notable lives, they had miserable lives. And although history writes it from a certain perspective from their side, you get actually the emotions of what was happening behind the scenes that the historians didn't write. And I mean, also the history is written by the victor, so they only get a certain side of it. But it was miserable lives, and they went through so much, and so much trauma and so much heaviness. But it is interesting because I found that same thread too, is that the clients don't want it, that it's weird. And sometimes, like you had said, it gets in the way of the therapeutic process because the conscious mind keeps chipping in and giving unhelpful advice on the matter. But yeah, it's not this, ooh, I want to be this person. It's oh, this feels really weird and awkward. And there's almost that acceptance process too, isn't there?
Yeah. But what was really surreal with this particular client was that she'd been buying a property, and she was buying a house. And just as she was literally days before signing the final papers, her estate agent came bounding through her front door and said, "You have to come and look at this flat." And she said, "Why would I look at a flat? I'm buying a house." He went, "You need to come and look at this flat," which was just down the road from where she was buying. So just to shut him up, she followed him down there. She walked into the flat and she said, "Oh my God, I need to buy this flat." And he said, "I know." So she cancelled the house. She buys the flat. And she was living there when we were doing all of this work, when we were doing the sessions. When we were both doing the research, it transpired that this person that she had discovered that she'd been in this other lifetime, her best friend had lived in the apartment next door. So she had visited that property in the other lifetime and stayed there for years. And after she moved in, I think it was sort of 2 apartments in the same building. After she moved in, there was a very, very elderly, very old lady that lived in the top apartment. And when I think she was moving out to a care home, she came down with a trunk and she gave the trunk to my client and said, "I just feel like you need to have this. These are the original deeds of the house." So it's got all of the papers of all the people that lived here. And she actually had the documentation of and the signatures of this person that she had been, who had lived across the corridor, which slightly freaked her out.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I can only imagine. And it makes me wonder that because this obviously doesn't happen to everyone who has a past life experience, but for her, what was the meaning behind having those documents? Was there some sort of evidence that she needed in her mind to kind of give it that validity, that it was that uncanny that you can't ignore it?
Yeah, I think she had been so resistant to it. And when she called me to tell me this, she was laughing at that point. It had popped, this resistance that she had to it. She said, "All right, I'm listening. Okay, I'll accept it. All right, it's fine. I'll get it. I don't need any more signs, thank you. No more weirdness."
Yeah. Yes. Is that funny?
Yeah.
It's
And she absolutely adored. I mean, it was a huge flat with a, character flat with a beautiful garden. And she absolutely loved it. She was really happy there. She was delighted with it. So yeah, but I just think that all of these things were kind of leading her back to that place.
yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
feeling that pull very physically in this lifetime, where, like you had said, you go to locations and you don't even know, you've never been there before in this lifetime, but for whatever reason, you know where you're going. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there are certain places in the world that have more energy. So I do a lot of stuff in Egypt, and we take people out there, and each time I go, there's different layers, because obviously the temples and things hold the frequency and the energy so much more. But what I love about taking groups out there is that you'll go to various different places. We do the whole of the Nile, and I'm always kind of waiting. I don't say it to the group, but there's always this sort of moment of anticipation of which one's going to, walk through the energy field, and the memories will come back and they'll remember. And we usually know because they get emotional. And then it's just, as each day goes by, you think, oh yeah, there we go. There's another one. And they go, oh my God, I've been here before. Oh my God, I'm having a vision of this. Yeah, all right, okay, there you go. But sometimes you just, you're in those spaces, and then, you just have to process and give it time. So, and I think that's why traveling is so important, because it awakens the soul, doesn't it?
Do you feel it gives them that other layer to the healing process to be in that physical location?
Definitely. And of course, a lot of those lifetimes there was, there were challenges, there was trauma, and like you said, it's almost like PTSD that this stuff is, when there's unfinished business or lifetimes that were challenging and that potentially ended on a, without the resolution that was needed, or, with a weight of some kind of emotional attachment to it. It's all bouncing around in our psyche. It's there in our energy field. We can't see it. We can't interpret it necessarily, but it's, our only clue is the things and the events, the people that show up in our lives that cause issues, because that's mirroring the bits inside of us that need to be taken care of. So, the more, I call it kind of either feng shui for the soul, or it's like spring cleaning, where the whole purpose of this work, as you know, is to go in and tidy up that unfinished business, to go in and get the clutter, the undone stuff, and bring it to the surface and get it resolved. And hypnosis is a beautiful way of doing that. Ask the right questions, we'll get there. But nothing is quite as profound as just being in situ and, walking into the portal and suddenly there you are, right back in it again. And and of course doing it in a safe space where you're held and it's okay to go there, because clearly if you were on a traditional tour and that happened, higher mind probably wouldn't allow it to come to the surface as much as it needed to, because it's not a safe environment to do it. But of course on our trips, pilgrimages, I don't really like to call them retreats because they're not, their higher mind knows that it's safe to open that door and let that experience, let that memory come to the surface, because it can be resolved, it can be taken care of.
And that they most likely signed up with you on that retreat for a reason versus all of the other ones that they could have signed up for.
Yeah, and there's always it's so funny as people come in and then you see them connecting, and that as you go through the links, the connections between the people that have turned up, there's never an accident with the people that show up for these things ever, which, that's magical in itself.
It is, isn't it? It's almost like you're able to be this kind of beacon, and you're pulling all these energies together that need to be there at that time, like in the classroom as well, too, that there's not a coincidence that you land with those people. And then there's always a similar thread of what you're working through together. And it's,
exactly.
Yeah. So uncanny every time. And we just, in, Western culture, just throw it away as coincidence instead of synchronicity. I feel like we'll really start advancing in health and wellness when we don't throw away what we've learned, but we go beyond this materialistic structure of just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because the shifts are there. Like you said, the shifts happen. People are changing. There's something to it. If you were doing this work and nothing happened, and then, okay, well, there's nothing there, right? Yeah,
exactly. And, in the 27 years that I've been doing this work, I've never advertised. My clients come through people that have had results, and then they send people on to me. So clearly something's happening. And I get messages. I had a message from a client that I'd worked with about 10 years ago saying, oh, I did all this work with you and it was brilliant and it shifted everything, and now I'm finding myself at a different crossroads in my life, and and I know that that's the thing that's going to work. So because they've seen the evidence, and that's always amazing, because again, you get it, is that sometimes we don't necessarily see the results. Clients go away, and of course, I'll message them, get feedback, see how they're doing. But then time goes on, and you're not following up with everybody. They probably think you're harassing them if you're like, every 6 months. Hi, how are you? Any changes?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So you don't always hear unless they come back to you and actually state it. So it's so wonderful when you get that feedback, and it's probably the most rewarding thing that you can ever experience, to know that the work is really out there making a difference.
And isn't that one of the biggest indicators of healing, is that you just forget that it was there at all, because your brain just doesn't even register it as a thing. So if you never hear from this person again, or they come in and they're like, oh, did that happen? And you look through their notes, like, yeah, you literally told me this was, 10 out of 10. And then they just totally forget that it happened. It's such an amazing thing to witness.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that it's often things that have been given up on by the medical professional, they just aren't answers for why these things are happening. And as I said, it's not like we ever say that we can cure things or fix things. That would be very irresponsible. But how just that awareness of, oh, this is connected to this. And we know, talking to my medical students, stress is at the heart of every single ailment or issue that any human has. If you dig deep enough, some kind of stressor is going to be at the root of it. So you take the stress out of the equation, and you take the fear or the anxiety or the negative belief that was generating all of that, and suddenly the foundation of whatever the ailment is doesn't exist anymore. So on a practical level, because I still have a scientific brain, I still need to know, I still need to be very practical about things. But that side of it, my logical mind can align to, that we're removing the stressor. We're taking away those negative beliefs that were generating anxiety and stress. And therefore, the situation isn't as relevant for some of the sort of, health issues or mental, emotional issues that people have been carrying with them. So, even that on its own is a sort of, a way for people to heal. But yeah, letting go of those contracts. I don't need to sacrifice myself anymore. I can actually live. I can experience love. I can actually be present. I can, spend time with my family. Is just so huge.
Giving yourself permission to let go of things, and as you know, you're not doing anything for them. They're choosing that. They're choosing to let it go, and they can choose to hold on to it too. That you can't force anyone, but you're actually making that choice. And what an empowering thing, especially when so many come through a system where they're told what to do and what their condition is called, and all of a sudden now you're giving them their power back, that you can choose to dissolve these patterns now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that place of forgiveness and understanding and recognizing that the things that are happening around us and to others, there's a point to it, there's a purpose to it. So I think it helps people to step out of judgment, really, which I think causes people a lot of stress, in that, oh, this is wrong and this isn't right, and these people shouldn't be doing this and that shouldn't be happening, and oh, isn't that terrible? But when you step back and you're looking at it from the bigger picture and think, well, what if everything that's happening, good and bad, is exactly as it's meant to be? And suddenly you don't need to focus on all the things that you don't like or that aren't working or that people perceive as being wrong. I think that takes a huge weight off people's shoulders as well.
Yeah. And all those stressors that you were talking about, you don't know where the roots are of what's causing those stressors to come up. And it can be from here and past lives and all the things that you're holding on to that are constantly bombarding the system, and then the body just has enough. And those physical symptoms that we don't enjoy are the body's way of communicating, like, hey, I am at capacity here, that you need to pay attention to what's going on. Yeah. And beautiful way to just free people up, to give them more space and capacity.
Yeah. And I think that the signs are usually there if people look, but we've generated a world where there's noise and distraction everywhere. So it's become much harder to actually just sit in that space of, what do I need? What's going on for me? What am I experiencing? Because it's, unless, if you're somebody that's lucky enough to live, by the sea or in the countryside, or, somewhere where it is tranquil and peaceful. But even then, we have our mobile phones that are constantly, we're at the beck and call. There's very little true peace, which is another reason why I love going to Egypt, because I like to go and sit in the desert with no technology, with no energy, with no civilization, nothing. Just go and sit in sand that, possibly no other human has ever touched. You just go out into the middle of the Sahara and just sit on a sand dune in just nothing. And there's nothing quite like that to connect you to the sort of primordial, or just that, your core sense. And, meditating there in that space is just, it just takes you into that space of vastness, which I think we've lost a little bit the ability to connect to something that's bigger and something more than the world that we're in.
I was going to say, those experiences must really make it a stark contrast to you for just how connected we are to our technology and our busy lives, and taking a step away from it, it's like, oh, wow, okay. We've moved as a society far away from being able to sit in that just nature where there's nothing around and no stimulation, constantly phones going off, messages beeping and booping at you, right? There's always something within arm's reach. You're standing in line at the grocery store and you're bored and you're scrolling on your phone. You don't get that chance to go in. And I feel like sometimes that's why the body has to be so loud, because it's fighting with all these distractions. And so it has to get your attention in a dramatic way, because we're so busy. We're kept busy on that hamster wheel. And I feel also a lot of times taught that going inside is the scary place, that, right, if I go inside, there's going to be things that I don't want to address, I don't want to deal with. And it's almost like at every turn, you're steered away from going in to the quiet, even though that's where all the answers lie.
Exactly. As a perpetual student trying to find answers to things, everything, every road that I explored always led me back to that same place, that the answers that you're looking for are inside of you. They're not outside.
Isn't that funny? No matter how many, like, I'm going to do this and take this course, and it all points you back. And yeah, well, that's good validation, isn't it?
And I think we've kind of forgotten to trust ourselves and to follow our gut instinct, which, when life was simpler, it was easier to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, Larry, wrapping up, is there a takeaway that you would want people who are listening to get out of this conversation? We've touched so many amazing points, but I'm curious, is there just, one or two kind of big takeaways that, if anything, they got from it, that's what you'd like to come across?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just going back to our final point, I think so many people think that doing this self-work, doing deep dives, is a bit indulgent, or, it's kind of unnecessary, and it's a bit selfish in some ways, where you could be, you're gonna heal the world by going out and doing things and volunteering and helping people. But, we're all connected. We're all one. So when we do the work on ourselves, and we actually do go in and do that inner work, you then get to be more present in the world and kind of lead by example. You're then giving other people permission to heal themselves, and it's like ripple in a pond that goes out. So I would say to people, take the time, do the work, and, and if they're not ready or, in a space where they can do that, just take some time out of your day, your week, your month to just go sit in nature, leave the phone at home for an hour, if they can manage an hour, or more. I quite often, I'll just turn the phone off and I'll go to the coast or I'll go to the countryside and I just won't look at it to the end of the day. And I think that that's really important, because otherwise the mind is so filled with clutter, there's no space for the good stuff to come in. So they would be my takeaways. Do the inner work, and if not, just find a place where you can do peace, quiet, and nature. And just be, just breathe, just be, and just get to know yourself. Socrates said it, didn't he? Know thyself. And however you choose to do it.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you for this conversation and all of your lovely insights. I'm so grateful to have you here today, and I hope that those listening just get as much of this out of this conversation as I have with you today.
Oh, thank you just so very, very much for doing all the work you're doing, and for having me here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Past Life Project. For more information how I can help you to access the wisdom of your subconscious mind to support deep healing and transformation, visit my website at moniqueglover.com. If you loved what you just listened to, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time.